Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Kitchen time. This is one of the orchids that came out of Big Box Junior. This is Cattleya germanii. This variety Cerulean, but that doesn't affect the plant. In effect, that's just for blooms. This is in soggy old moss, so it's got to come out anyway. And this is about as big as this plant. Oh, I better keep that. It's a really good quality pot, that. Not. This is about as big as this plant gets. It is classed as a compact Cattleya. And as these roots have been in soggy moss for probably the majority of their life, a transition directly from that into what can be very dry, large bark might not be the best of ideas, because this is so compacted it won't even come off the plant. I'm going to have to do this under the tap, I think. But obviously Cattleya roots are precious. You know, I've got some with active growing tips. I think I'd do better easing that moss off under the tap. There are some old roots, there will be some dead roots in here, bound to be, but there are some nice ones down the bottom of the pot. Yeah, so I'm hoping to salvage a pretty good root system off of this, and to aid with its transition of coming out of this stuff, it's going to get mounted. On the ground it doesn't grow too large, it's not too heavy, the pot's more than the weight of the plant at the moment, so by mounting it, it'll still be in sphagnum moss in part, so the transition for the roots will not be quite so dramatic. And it may end up holding on to a lot more of them rather than dumping them like some Cattleyas do. Some Cattleyas, especially if you change the media dramatically, they object by dropping their roots basically. And then you've got to wait for some new ones. Yeah, we've got some quite active roots in places here. In the main they look like they're coming from this area and heading down. So it hasn't been a disaster for the plant being in the sphagnum, but potentially it would be eventually. You know, the Cattleyas don't like to stay soggy, not for any length of time. They do like to dry right out. Well, obviously sphagnum moss can be allowed to dry right out. Typical. There is an old section of sphagnum moss in here from when it was a younger plant that's just been left there to rot. So anyway, I'll get that under the tap and try and tease that moss out. The other one I'm going to have a go at is the Dendrobium Victoria reginae, as that's going to be mounted as well. I thought I'd get the two mounts done first. The other two that are in pots, they're in good bark. They can sit there for as long as I need to leave them, really. There's no desperate rush to do these, but I do want to get these this out of this moss and into something a bit better, so it just as well get mounted. And we'll do the Dendrobium at the same time. So shut the camera off while I wash this off in the sink, and I'll be back. Okay, what we've ended up with is actually quite a good root system, but there are some parts of it that are just gone, and luckily they're all attached to the old part of the plant. There's no point in leaving them on there, they're coming off. And it's literally the back end of the plant, as you would expect. That is often the way of the Cattleya world. The older the roots, the more likely they are to just go. Often as a consequence of disturbing them, it can cause them to just fail. But generally speaking, this is not too bad. It's like that one, that root's gone, but the top part of it's good. And as you can see from that root, it's got a branching root system. It naturally branches. So if you get a bit that looks a bit dead like that, that's got new bits coming out, well, just go back there. Just take the dead end off. That root's completely gone. Managed to thread its way through the whole plant. Where does that start then? Oh, I see. There we go. That's got you. You're all gone. Come off. Still a couple on that old part of the plant. I'm going a bit careful because as I creep along the rhizome from the oldest part of the plant, you start getting to some good roots, and some of those are really long. You know, you snip that by mistake at the base of the plant, you've lost a substantial root. So I'm just going a bit careful. Oh, itchy nose. This is not too bad. There's little ones like that. That's got a dead end. It's a completely dead root there. That needs to get back to the beginning, which is in there. There's a long dead one there. Well, this is not too bad at all. I've had far, far worse Cattleya root systems than this, and they've survived. But I don't want to mount dead roots, because obviously once you decide to mount a plant, you're expecting it to stay there for a long time. Well, those roots are only going to rot, so it's better that they're not there in the first place. Dead one there, lurking. Oh, that one's not dead, but it's broken. Could have been clumsy me under the tap. I don't think I'm going to do much more than that. I don't see any really long manky ones anymore. There's a few stringy bits left where the roots have completely got washed off down the sink and left the stringy bit behind. That's not bad. That's a much better root system than I was expecting. And the roots go back to here. The good roots start here. So there's only these two pseudobulbs at the back that haven't really got any roots. But they are supporting the plant, irrespective of whether they've got roots or not. They're still capable of storing energy. And I suppose in theory they're even capable of producing an eye. Now just for those that like that sort of thing, the back of this plant, you're supposed to keep at least 4 pseudobulbs if you can when splitting a Cattleya. Well, I got a new growth, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so I could take those back 2 bulbs off and try and start a new plant with those 2. And who knows, next time I play with this I may well do that, but I'm not doing it this time. I want as much energy retained in this plant as possible so that it can get going on a mount. It's quite a nice plant. Looks a flipping sight better out of that manky moss anyway. Not bad at all. And there's more than enough roots there to start hanging on to a mount. I've just got to find one suitable now. And I've got to make up my mind how to mount that. It's got a linear rhizome. That ought to be maintained. These 2 nice roots would be good if they were up against the mount, but these roots are arching outwards. If I try and squash that against the mount, they're liable to break. Whereas round this side of the plant, although these roots are also sticking outwards, they will go flat. I mean, there you have it. There is flatness against the complete length of the rhizome, so it will go on a mount that way round. Obviously the new growth needs to go in the centre. Wondering whether to take. I mean, the trouble is that old part of the plant has still got 2 perfectly healthy leaves and good sized pseudobulbs, so it would be silly to separate it at this point. So that's that one done. And then I think I might, the 2 little bits of the Dendrobium Victoria reginae, or regina, however you want to say it. This is not a lot of use, and I'm wondering whether to take a risk with that. What I had in mind, which I've never done before, I've never heard of anybody else doing it, and it might not work, but if you lay a Dendrobium cane on some damp moss, it will often produce keikis from the leaf nodes with associated roots. Now, it isn't really the cane that's growing the roots, it's the keikis, if you see what I mean. As in here, it's not the cane that's really growing the roots, it's the keiki. But I'm inclined to take that cane off at that leaf node and put some rooting hormone powder on it. Now, I've never heard of a cane rooting out the end due to damage, but it can do no harm, and there is no point in keeping this bit. So it's got to be worth a try, hasn't it? Well, so I don't know where my rooting hormone powder is. It's out in the shed, I think. It's raining at the moment. But I'm going to snip that off, and then that gives me the base of a plant. Now, if that kiki sucks the life out of that cane while it gets itself going, it's not the end of the world, because that's the oldest cane. I mean, it could potentially bloom, but looking at these nodes here, I think it may have already done that once. Yeah, I think that may have bloomed in the past, or attempted to bloom and failed. But a lot of these leaf nodes do have a little... How close can I get that going out of focus? So if you see on the end of my finger, you can see something's come out of these leaf nodes in the past. And I suspect it tried to bloom. It either tried and failed or succeeded, but it means if that cane's already bloomed, it's unlikely to do it again. So it just as well be a life support system for that kiki. And if by some chance I manage to get some roots to come out of the base, it should then shoot out and produce new growth. But that remains to be seen. That's a very dodgy idea. I've never heard of anyone trying it and getting it to work. It's all very well trying these things, but you need to let people know if they work or not, and obviously I will. So I've got these two little pieces to get on a mount. Now this only needs a tiny little mount. These are not large growing plants. They are prone to kikis, although I suspect with this one, because this is a cool to cold grower, it grows pretty high up this, that the chances are its kiki production is due to being a bit warm, possibly. Anyway, I only need a very small mount just to get those two pieces on with these roots in some moss. We'll see what I can find, but I'm going to have to go out in the shed to sort out some mounts, and at the moment it's raining, so that's not happening. I'll be back when I've got something sorted out. Okay, let's get the Cattleya done first. Now, I don't normally do this. Spark would normally be that way. You can see that's its orientation, but it's going that way because I need width. It's a Cattleya with a linear growth pattern, so I want it wider rather than tall. Yeah, so that makes sense. And because it's going to go that way, if I had a single hook, it could do that with the weight of the plant. But by going for two hooks, I can actually join them at the top and it won't wobble. It won't swing that way, it'll just stay linear. So that's why there's two big bits of wire sticking up. There's long pieces of wire there because relative to the mount, the plant's quite tall. So the hook needs to be above where the leaf tips are, so that I can hang it without the hook interfering with the leaves. So that's why those bits are so long. And they're not joined together or cut to length yet, because I don't know how long they're going to need to be. Right, now I'm going to wire this on, and obviously I need to go incredibly careful with the new growth. That's the idea, is that it goes flat. The new growth will then be very close to the mount, and any more new roots that come out will attach quite quickly. So it's going to go, where's my camera? It should still be in. Now obviously the back end of the plant is unlikely to grow. There's a remote possibility, but it's unlikely to grow. So I'm moving it over this side so that the new growth is almost in the centre. It's then got stacks of room to move off in that direction. Now all of these roots aren't going to have moss on them. I'm just spreading them out so that they're relatively flat. And some of these roots are going to have some moss. But first job is to get the plant attached. Otherwise the moss is just going to fall off. And all I'm going to do to attach the plant is put that piece of wire around the end of the mount and twist it. That will hold that piece of wire still, and then I can take this end into that nice little niche there, and that's that piece of wire quite tight. This is quite thick wire, two reasons for that. I've run out of the thin stuff. That's a good enough reason, isn't it? And in addition to that, I do need this to be a pretty permanent thing. Now the first piece of wire is holding the plant in place right near the base of the plant. Before that piece of wire goes round, we can get some moss on, and then the wire will hold it. I don't want lots, I want some. But the fact that this came out of a pot full of moss, this will make these roots feel at home for a while. And then after time, when I get lots of new roots all nicely attached to the mount, if I choose to, I can just tease this moss off and it will be gone. And then it will be a bare rooted plant on a mount, should I choose to do that. And that will actually do. I don't want any more than that. Now I'm going to take that one across there so that it holds a lot of the moss, and then go round, providing I've got enough, and make like a crisscross and come back down there and hold the rest of the moss in place. And that should do it. Now all I've got to do is just make sure this wire doesn't come unravelled. I've got wet hands at the moment. I'm sorry, I'm just one of those, I can't work with wet hands, it annoys me if nothing else. And before I join all these wires together to hold the plant in place, just to prove I don't always not put tags on my mounts, we have a nice shiny new tag. Yeah. So now I'll get told off otherwise. So I can just thread that on there, just push that. In fact, if I tuck that under there, like that, is it going to go? Will it go? Then it won't wobble around. Ah, that's good, that's got it. So we've got a nice tag, nicely in place. And then all I've got to do, tag's upside down actually, but never mind. I'll stand on my head and read it. Now all I've got to do really is just give that a twist. My wire cutters and cut the ends off. And then just give that a little bit of a pull with the pliers to make sure it's tight. Pull and a twist, preferably in the right direction, or you just undo what you've already done. That's nice and tight now. And when you've wired to a mount, if you want the wire to be even tighter, just put your thumb in it, give it a kink. You can do it round the front or round the back, but just give it a kink and it just gives it that little bit of tightness. Like this one here, I can push that and it will stay there because it's wire. So everything's nice and tight now. There we go, that's that one done. While it was under the tap, I gave the leaves a bit of a wash. They may need another one in the future, but nonetheless it's a lot cleaner than it was. So that's that one done. Right, now I'll just have a quick clear away and sort myself out ready for the next one. Just a quick update. When I went to hang this, the plant was flopping a bit, pulling away. So what I've done is I've made a hole either side of that pseudo bulb and just put a loop of wire around and secured it at the back. Yeah, so that's now holding the plant nice and upright and much firmer than it was before. So that's nice now. Yeah. Make sure that moss doesn't fall off. Yep, that'll do. So that'll go and hang up now. I've done the double hook to keep it nice and level, horizontal I mean. So in the grow room with you. Right, let's have a go at the little Dendrobium then. Found a nice little piece of wood for that. That only ever needs to be a tiny mount. These plants don't grow that big. Potentially, if it does grow and does really well, all of the new canes are going to come out from the base of the plant. The roots can go all over that, round the back, they can do what they like, but it doesn't need to be any bigger than that. It's going to be a pendulous style Dendrobium anyway, which if you have a look at pictures of these growing in the wild, they tend to often be hanging out what I'll call sideways. So if you find them growing on a trunk, you might get a few growths sort of pointing sort of upwards and then they're downwards. And they're often growing on the sides of branches as well where they hang down. So it naturally is pendulous, although some of the new growths start off growing upright. So it's going to hang down. So a little short hook, you know, it's the mount that will go near the roof, not the plant. So a little short hook for that one. Right, now we're going to have an experiment with the root hormone rooting powder. I can't see this working personally, but I just need to get the end of the cane wet, otherwise the powder won't stick. And then it's just a matter of dipping that in, and it may or may not work. There's only one way to find out, isn't there? Who knows? So that's it, just coated the end. That also has some, what you call it, antiseptic type properties within that powder to stop rot and things like that. So that saves me mucking about with cinnamon, 2 in 1. Right, now both of these are going to go directly on the mount, near the top. I'm not sure that piece is going to grow, but it does have a new growth. That may well form some roots down the line a bit, and I want that one underneath that big cane. So I'm just going to put it on like that, and this is a fishing line job this time, so it would pay to actually have some, wouldn't it, ready. It's only a tiny little amount, and it doesn't matter how many times I go round, it's not going to use much, that's for sure. So we don't need a huge amount, just go round a few times. It's mainly to hold the moss in place. No moss underneath the plant. This is my new way of doing things. That way, if ever I want to change the moss, or just take the moss off and leave it bare rooted, certainly with that Cattleya, that's probably what will end up happening, then the moss comes off pretty easy if it's on top of the roots. It does not come off very easy if it's underneath the roots, because you end up tearing the plant off the mount, which doesn't do it any good. Right, I've just made a little slip knot there over the top, and you pull that tight, and that's effectively got the plant in one go then, with any luck. Then I can put some moss on and we can start winding. I don't need a huge amount, it's only a very small plant. There's hardly any roots at the moment. So that's all I'm going to use, just that little bit. I just want enough over the existing roots to keep them hydrated. And then they might actually grow and branch out. So that's it, that tiny little bit. But what I don't want is the base of the plant covered up too much. So I'm holding wet moss and trying to dry my hands at the same time. Duh. Right, where are we then? Where's my long piece? There we go. Right, round where my thumb is. Round again. Round the top part of the moss. That really is everything in place now. That's everything held, just 3 turns. I'm just going to take one more round near the base of the plant, as I've got some spare. And that's it, that's all I need to do. And all I need to do is tie this end off. I can show you that now. When you make a loop and then you start to wind, you end up with a V. Yeah? The first bit is the loop, the next bit is where you did your first turn. And if you take your loose end that you want to tie and tuck it through that V, you've got something to pull against. It gives you a place for your knot to be, and it's effectively up against the first knot you made. So you've got something to pull tight to. It's just a little thing, but can save you. Have you ever tried tying a knot in air with fishing line? You know, when you haven't got something to pull against. And before I get too many knots, we need to get our new tag on, which hasn't got a hole in it at the moment, so let's I'll have to use the scissors. So I've taken the screwdriver that I normally use in there, so this is where we see some blood, where I poke it right through my finger. Right, get that tied on. Not that I would forget what this one is, but you know, just as well. I've got the tags, they were bought for me as a present. And that goes back to Rose. Who remembers Rose? Yeah, very active on YouTube at one point, both in comments and making videos. Not really a very well person for some of the time, but did well to keep going, but then just disappeared off the face of the planet, so we don't know what happened to her. If you're still watching, Rose, hi, and these are your tags I'm using up. There we go then. So we've got a little base with what is in effect a kiki with a new growth, and then we've got a cane with another kiki coming out. So potential growth here is this little bit, where's my camera, this tiny little bit here on the end of my finger. This could carry on extending. That one could, it does have a new leaf there, so this one could carry on growing, and that new growth at the base of that bit could, in theory, and should carry on growing and push out some roots. So that's it. That's about the best I can do with that, and I don't see any reason why it won't grow, but it's got a lot of growing to do to get to a blooming size plant, even though that cane is blooming size. And this is not a large Dendrobium, I would say it was small to medium, but most of the small ones you see are that size because they're not being grown very well. And the reason they're not being grown very well in the main is they're kept too flipping warm. This is a real cool grower. This can grow up really high. So although it comes from a warm part of the world, not where it grows it's not. So it's cool to cold. You know, this is Masdevallia temperature, suits this one. So not up in the roof for you. Down much lower where you don't get the heat. Still needs good light though. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.